I'm Emily Hawthorne, a Middle East and North Africa analyst at Stratfor, and this podcast is brought to you by Stratfor Worldview, our premier digital publication for objective geopolitical intelligence and analyses. Individual, team, and enterprise memberships are available at worldview.stratfor.com/subscribe.
There's so much going on in the world right now. And through the year in World Geo, we've talked a lot about North Korea, the changing policies of the Trump administration, Israel and Palestine. There have been so many things that we've been able to access and unlock in a different way than just what the New York Times would give.
Welcome to the Stratfor Podcast, focused on geopolitics and world affairs from Stratfor.com. I'm your host, Ben Sheen. About a year ago, Stratfor connected with a group of world geography teachers at the Liberal Arts and Science Academy, also known as LASA High School in Austin, Texas. Stratfor senior analysts have long visited the school in person to discuss geopolitics and international affairs. But we wanted to see what would happen if we provided the students there with complete access to our long-form analysis and forecasting available through Stratfor Worldview. The results, well, they exceeded even our expectations. And in this episode of the Stratfor Podcast, we're going to sit down with LASA High School world geography teachers Cody, Moody, and Neil Loewenstern, as well as freshmen Abigail Goff, Jacob Hammonds, Dylan Woolard, and Tess Frazer. And they're going to tell us how LASA integrated Stratfor's analysis into their projects and coursework this past year, and also what it's meant to these students, both in and outside of the classroom. Thanks for joining us. Well, thank you so much to everyone for joining me today on this podcast. Now, obviously, you all, like us at Stratfor, have a shared interest in international affairs, world geography, current events. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do at LASA High School and your approach to world affairs in general?
Hi, this is Cody Moody. So as you know, a world geography teacher here in our world geography curriculum, we're adamant about incorporating current events into the classroom, but current events that also allow us to use those current events to connect to big geographic concepts, and that's kind of where Stratfor really helps us out. So we use current events throughout the year, and we're consistently as an activity trying to use those current events to help kids develop a larger geographic framework, geopolitical framework, kind of putting that current event in some context to facilitate kind of better understanding. So that's one of the things that I think, throughout the year that we definitely focus a lot of attention on in the world geography class.
I mean, that's great to hear, Cody. As a former geography student myself, I remember when I was going through school, it was kind of delineated into the physical and human aspects of geography. But one of the great things about working here at Stratfor is that there are so many different and additional layers to that. And certainly once you start, geography is obviously the foundation for so much of what we do here. But when you have these political overlays as well, it allows you to draw these important connections around the world.
Hi, I'm Abigail Goff. And one thing about LASA that I've noticed has been different from other schools I've attended, LASA is a lot more open to more opinions all around the world. There are more opinions brought into the classroom. And one thing that I really like that we've done this year is every 6 weeks, each student has to present a current event. And when I do this, I really enjoy using Stratfor to find these current events, because I find that Stratfor brings a lot of ideas to the table, and can be an unbiased source for this information that I can present to my classmates, and we can have a really good discussion on issues that concern us.
That's right. I'm Jacob Hammonds. Whenever I find conflicting information on an event that's just happened, Stratfor is usually the first place I would go to check, because it's a very reliable way to find out maybe what's really happened, or at least what's been officially recognized as happening. And it's a great place to get some insight about what could happen or how that relates to other events that are going on.
Yeah, and I suspect as well that your approach actually in doing this research is very similar to our own analysts, in that you have this incredible wealth of information now at your fingertips. And it's so it's increasingly difficult these days to differentiate, your truth from fiction, or what is actual facts value versus what could be conjecture. And that's certainly a big thing that our analysts do here. And we use a lot of working models. So immediately when we look at something, we can put it into the correct context and weigh it against everything else in our database and, kind of check it for validity. And it seems like you guys have this very natural approach in your own research to doing this.
Yeah, this is Neil Loewenstern, another world geography teacher. And we definitely want to stress with our kids this idea of thinking geographically, which is, again, kind of thinking about the physical, the human aspects, and really getting into economics, politics, and how those things are kind of overlapping also with various cultural aspects. And I really find that Stratfor does that when it kind of dives deeply into a particular current event and really looking back into the history that underlies that event. And I think the kids really appreciate sort of getting all of that information, all of those perspectives, and just kind of having the complexity of those layers so that we can kind of make sense of what's happening in the world today and get some sense of where this might be going, which is, again, what Stratfor does such a good job with. And we're able to access that information pretty easily in the different sections on the website, or finding those kind of foundational readings like the geopolitics of Russia and things like that.
Yeah, I'm Dylan Woolard, and I'm a freshman at LASA, and I read Stratfor outside of school projects. I actually like to trade stocks and stuff, and some of the breakdowns that Stratfor has about tariffs and such, it actually really helps me out sometimes, and it's not necessarily saving me money, but at least I know why I see a dip every so often. And I mean, it's also just it's fun to see the graphics that Stratfor puts out there. They're really comprehensive and really well designed and made graphics, as well as the articles themselves. Very well worded, and I love reading them.
I'm Tess Frazer, and something that I really appreciate about what Stratfor does is it doesn't just tell a single story. It looks at each topic with many perspectives, and it helps to really enhance the geopolitical analysis and perspective that you're getting. So instead of just seeing it through one set of eyes, you can really understand the world significance and how it is affecting each different group of people involved.
Yeah, I think this is Cody again. One of the things also that I feel like Neil and I have, by having access to Stratfor and the kids having access to Stratfor, one of the things that I feel like we've been effective with in terms of facilitating that student understanding is kind of the idea that nothing in the world occurs in a vacuum, and all countries are connected to one another, and kind of thinking of the world as a system, right, as a global system, as opposed to each of its constituent country, nation state parts. We do a project with our freshmen on Central Asia and the Caucasus region, and I think that project in particular really highlights how students come to understand the relationships, right, between the Central Asian countries, how those relationships now, the region is figuring its way out, in this post-Soviet kind of world, still Russia casting a huge shadow right, over it. So, all the connections and relationships between Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, right, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and how all of those connections are quite important in developing a regional understanding as opposed to sort of each just individual country. So I think students come away from world geography with a good understanding of that. The world as a system.
Yeah, and they're able to kind of understand where not only Russia plays in that, but the EU, China, India, the United States, and Iran begin to really kind of see the larger geopolitical chessboard that's happening in the world, and are able to kind of continue to apply that framework as we delve into various current events or see what's happening in North Korea, the tariffs that are various developments in our own country and President Trump's policies. So I think everything just makes so much more sense through that lens that you guys are creating and we're able to apply here in our class.
And I think that's what makes this such an interesting time to be studying this sort of material, because these are very uncertain times. And if you just look at the daily news reports, it's very hard often to place these things in an appropriate level of context. So I think actually being able to think critically in this way, and also to be able to decode this global complexity that we all have to deal with on a daily basis is incredibly valuable. We'll get back to our conversation with LASA High School and learn a little bit more about how they leverage the analysis available on Stratfor Worldview in their interactive projects in just one moment. But it's worth noting that this isn't the only place that Stratfor Worldview is being used in the classroom. Stratfor works with universities and other higher education institutions around the world, basically to expand research and learning opportunities and to provide independent, unbiased analysis on international affairs that's grounded in the study of applied geopolitics. Stratfor Senior Vice President of Strategic Analysis, Roger Baker, touched on a few examples of how different schools leverage Stratfor analysis in their programs during a recent live webcast discussion.
There's a few universities I know who are using our actual day-to-day writing as part of their international business courses. And what they're doing is taking these current issues that people are seeing in the news around them and taking our work that sort of brings this different perspective to it and helping contextualize it so that when they're then thinking about the business implications or aspects or what might this mean for not only today, but 6 months down the road, 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road, because when you're making business decisions have a forward-looking thought process to them. They're using that to reframe the way in which people look at these issues. If you think about the media today, everything is breaking news. The media is extremely volatile. And by using the material that we work on and we write, we bring you into a narrower space in the middle that lets you say, okay, these are the significant aspects of it. There's a lot of important stuff and noisy stuff on here in the shorter term, but that brings you in. And I think that that's been a way, for example, for schools that have used a lot of our pre-written material as part of their class instruction.
If you're interested in learning more about how universities and other higher education institutions engage with Stratfor through library resources, curriculum supplements, and in-depth methodology training, we'll share a link to the complete webcast discussion in the show notes. And you can also find the link at our blog at stratfor.com/horizons. Now back to our conversation with students and teachers at LASA High School in Austin, Texas. I'd love to hear some more about some of the current events that you are currently looking at and the way in which you are maybe using some of the Stratfor material to augment your own research and trying to shine a light on what's going on globally, really.
Okay. This is Tess again. And recently we did a big project concerning the Israel-Palestine conflict. And recently in the media and news, there have been so many news reports on the situation. And sometimes it's really hard to understand what's really going on because we see it so disconnected and out of place. But I feel like when I was able to do research on Stratfor and really get an understanding of what each country is experiencing, it helped me to understand the situation as less of an outsider. And I feel like it wasn't as removed. It was very engaging and it really helped with the projects too, because it gave a really great demographics analysis for Israel. And we each represented a country, so we really had to step into that role. With Stratfor having each individual country listed and all this wealth of information on it, it's really helpful in understanding the situation.
Right, this is Jacob, and actually at that summit, I was playing the part of a representative from Iran, and it's very interesting because as we were engaging in this debate, there were events that were happening in the region where we would have to adjust our strategy and change what we were going to do. And the updates I got from Stratfor about that were key to the changes I made about what I was pursuing.
Yeah, so this is Dylan, and I was actually representing the United States in the project, and recently a lot of our policies regarding Israel and Palestine kind of flip-flopped with the Trump administration. And doing research for the project using Stratfor really helped break it down, and it made it much easier to understand why, what was happening, and how it affected our stances with other countries in the region. And it really got rid of the cloud and the fog that came over me as I try to learn more about the United States' position on Israel and Palestine.
But as you said earlier, I agree. There's so much going on in the world right now. It's really hard to be able to understand. So that daily briefing, as well as just the perspective and the way that everything connects. And through the year in World Geo, we've studied we've talked a lot about North Korea, the changing policies of the Trump administration, Israel and Palestine, the nuclear deal in Iran. There have been so many things that we've been able to access and unlock in a different way than just what the New York Times gives.
I mean, it sounds like the approach you have is honestly fascinating. I kind of really wish I could have been there to experience some of this back and forth discourse you've been having. And I think certainly one of the things we find is when you actually look at things from a certain country's perspective, you can really start to understand some of their key drivers and even some of their constraints when it comes to factors that shape the decision making of countries. And it sounds like you guys have a really good handle on how those interactions, relationships are really shaping the political stage at the moment, because there's a huge amount going on currently.
I agree with that. And with the political divide in the world right now, I think it was really helpful for these projects and articles to really understand and decode what was going on. They were really helpful in showing how negotiating works and how all parties bring all their issues to the table.
Yeah, it was just really cool to see a bunch of raw and unbiased information that you could really take into your own account and shape your own ideas and opinions about, instead of just going to watching some random news station and just being filled with some facts, but a lot of other propaganda or something else that's just filled in there to fit an agenda. Yeah, it was really awesome to experience unbiased information, especially today in America, where fake news is thrown everywhere and people say this and that, and you always have to go fact checking everything. It was just refreshing to have a resource like Stratfor just be there.
And I think another skill that students gain, this is Cody again, in the world geography course, is oftentimes for many freshmen, they have kind of an idealistic approach, right, towards world affairs, or towards how they think, right, the world works. I feel like it's a good skill that students develop over the year, and we can definitely see it, right, with our simulations and our projects where they're representing countries, where we force them, right, into the role of representing the interest of that country, which sometimes, of course, right, by their standards, their personal standards, by American standards, doesn't add up, right, to what's appropriate in terms of human rights, or human rights violations and despicable kind of political behavior. But students develop a good understanding what it means, right, what national interest means, and how messy, right, the world really is.
Looking at things from a specific country's perspective, and that's one of my favorite parts about Stratfor, is reading the geopolitical analyses of different countries. Is the first thing I did for Ron when we started the summit on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And those pages in particular, they just give me so much insight I never would have thought about on my own about why those countries do what they do. What it said in the particular page about Iran is that this kind of image they've developed of being rash or unpredictable is kind of very calculated, so that outside powers will be afraid of interfering for fear of an overreaction from Iran. And one of the things we said is that's because one of the biggest threats to Iran is the influence of an outside power on these relatively separated communities, since most people are living in the mountains. I mean, I could have learned about the geography of Iran going somewhere else. I could have learned about the politics of Iran going somewhere else, but I never could have reached that conclusion looking at one source like I could when I was looking at Stratfor.
Fantastic. And that's great to hear. And certainly one of the things that we find when we go through our particular analysis is just trying to bring in as much information as possible and distilling it down and creating a consumable overlay that really encapsulates all the things you really need to know. And I mean, it's really powerful when you look at the world the way it is, not necessarily the way it should be. And you kind of understand that things happen based on national interest, and countries' behavior a lot of times is, you can kind of see which way they're going to go based upon the way they've acted in the past and what their real core imperatives and drivers are. I think once you look at the world through this sort of lens, you do see it differently. And that sort of ability to critically interpret information and make rational deductions from it, that is a lifelong skill. And it sounds like you guys are absolutely set up for future success.
Through this year, my perspectives have changed so much, because I used to look at the news and be like, oh no, why is North Korea doing that? And I didn't connect all the pieces, but being able to see the historical, the geopolitical, and the national interests that these countries have and how they interact with each other, it makes the world make so much more sense. And especially with all the crazy stuff that's going on, it's nice to be able to really understand the way that this is working. It's not as foreign and distant. And I know that moving forward, I'll be able to use Stratfor and just in general with a different perspective, with this analysis, I'll be able to look at the world and understand the national interests and the geopolitical contributing factors to what is happening.
Well, that is absolutely fantastic to hear. And it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you all today. And I love the fact that you use Stratfor in your daily lives. And I really look forward to seeing what you produce in the future. Cody, Neil, Abby, Jake, Tess, and Dylan, it's been great talking to you today. Thanks so much for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you.
And that wraps up this episode of the Stratfor Podcast. If you'd like to learn more about how LASA High School has used Stratfor Worldview to expand educational opportunities for their students, World Geography teachers Cody, Moody, and Neil Loewenstern are working on some related blog posts about their projects. Once these are up, you can find them at stratfor.com/horizons. That's also where you'll find a link to our extended webcast discussion about geopolitical resources for higher education. If you're not already a Stratfor Worldview member, you can sign up for our free newsletter or learn more about complete access to our analysis through individual, team, and enterprise memberships at worldview.stratfor.com/subscribe. And for more geopolitical intelligence, analysis, and forecasting that reveal the underlying significance and future implications of emerging world events, follow us on Twitter @Stratfor.